Jack Miller was 26 years old and certain of who he was. In a world where people often describe themselves as figuring things out, he stood on firm ground. He was openly straight, confident in his identity, and comfortable with the life he had built through discipline rather than chance. He worked as a delivery driver in a mid-sized American city where highways cut between glass office towers and quiet residential neighborhoods. His days began before sunrise and often ended long after the sky turned violet. The rhythm of scanning packages, mapping routes, climbing staircases, and knocking on unfamiliar doors gave him structure. Structure gave him control. Among his co-workers, Jack had a reputation. He was the one who showed up early, the one who double-checked addresses, the one supervisors trusted when routes needed to be covered without complaint. Reliable, disciplined, emotionally steady, he didn't gossip in the loading bay or flirt with trouble. He kept his head down and delivered. Independence mattered to him. He had moved out at 18, paid his own bills, built his own credit, and refused financial shortcuts. Stability was earned, not inherited. He tracked his savings, planned investments, and kept a modest but clean apartment on the west side of the city. Order in his surroundings reflected order in his thinking. Relationships, however, were less structured. A few months earlier, he had ended things with a woman he had dated for nearly a year. She wanted weekends away, spontaneous dinners, deeper conversations about the future. Jack wanted overtime hours and financial progress. When she accused him of loving his job more than her, he didn't argue. He simply admitted that work made sense. Work rewarded effort. Work didn't demand emotional decoding. He often described himself with 3 words: simple, direct, focused. Simple meant he didn't complicate feelings. Direct meant he said what he meant. Focused meant distractions had no place in his long-term plans. He avoided emotionally tangled situations the way some people avoided debt. If something felt unpredictable, he stepped back. If someone seemed intense, he maintained distance. Attraction, in his mind, was straightforward and biological. You saw someone. You felt something. It aligned with who you already knew yourself to be. End of story. Identity was fixed. Desire was controlled. Understanding yourself was a completed task, not an ongoing project. At least that's what he believed. That Thursday had stretched longer than expected. Traffic delays, rerouted streets, a broken elevator in a downtown complex. By the time dusk settled, his scanner showed one final delivery. The address was in an upscale neighborhood he rarely visited: wide streets, manicured lawns, modern architecture lit by subtle landscape lighting. He checked the package label twice. Signature required. Jack parked along the curb and stepped out, the cool evening air brushing against his skin. The house in front of him stood taller than the others nearby, sharp lines of steel and glass reflecting the fading sky. Warm interior lights glowed through expansive windows. He adjusted the package under his arm and walked toward the front door, boots quiet against the polished stone path. For reasons he couldn't immediately explain, his pace slowed as he reached the entrance. It wasn't fear. It wasn't exhaustion. Just a subtle hesitation, like a faint signal in the back of his mind. He shifted the box in his hands and stared at the doorbell for half a second longer than necessary. Then he lifted his hand and paused. The door opened almost immediately after Jack pressed the bell, as if someone had been standing just on the other side waiting. The man who stepped into view was older than Jack by several years, early to mid-30s, maybe. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that didn't need volume. Broad shoulders filled out a fitted dark t-shirt. His posture was relaxed, balanced, grounded. Not intimidating, yet undeniably strong. His presence felt steady. "Evening," the man said. His voice was low, smooth, measured. Not rushed, not distracted. Jack shifted the package slightly. "Delivery for Lucas Bennett. Signature required." "I'm Lucas." Their eyes met. Lucas held eye contact in a way that was calm, deliberate. Not challenging. Not flirtatious, at least not obviously. Just attentive. And then came the smile. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't stretch too wide. but it lingered a fraction longer than polite conversation required. Long enough for Jack to register it. Long enough to feel it. Jack cleared his throat slightly and handed over the device for signature. Lucas stepped aside to steady the package against the doorway wall as he signed. From where he stood, Jack caught a glimpse inside the home. Warm lighting filled the entryway, soft golden tones rather than harsh overhead glare. The interior was clean but not sterile. A leather couch sat in the living room, dark brown and worn just enough to suggest comfort rather than decoration. A large abstract painting hung above it, bold lines, restrained colors. A bookshelf lined one wall, filled with hardcovers arranged without obsessive precision. Muted tones, subtle masculinity, no clutter, no chaos. It didn't feel like a house staged for appearance. Felt lived in. Lucas handed back the device. Long shift. Jack blinked. "Excuse me? You look exhausted," Lucas added gently. The observation caught him off guard. Customers rarely looked at him long enough to notice anything beyond a uniform and a package. Most exchanges lasted seconds. Doors opened. Boxes changed hands. Doors closed. "I'm fine," Jack replied automatically. "Just a full route." Lucas nodded, still studying him, not critically but carefully. "You want some water?" Jack hesitated. Company policy recommended keeping interactions brief. He usually declined offers without thinking. "I'm good," he said. Lucas didn't step back inside. Instead, he leaned slightly against the doorway, relaxed. "It's hot out. At least take a bottle." No strings attached. There was a faint trace of humor in his tone. "Light, easy." Jack considered it. The evening air still carried warmth from the day, and his throat felt dry. "Water's fine," he said finally. Lucas disappeared briefly into the house. Jack remained on the porch, aware of the quiet neighborhood around him. Distant traffic hummed. A dog barked somewhere down the block. He told himself this was normal, harmless. Lucas returned with a cold bottle and handed it over. Their fingers brushed for the briefest second. It was nothing. Accidental. Still, Jack noticed. "Rough week?" Lucas asked. Jack twisted the cap open. "Just work. You strike me as someone who doesn't slow down much." The comment landed differently. Not accusatory. Observant. Jack gave a small shrug. "Staying busy keeps things simple." Lucas tilted his head slightly, as if considering that. Simple can be good, but sometimes it's overrated. Silence hovered, not uncomfortable, but charged with something unspoken. Then Lucas gestured lightly toward the interior. "I was about to pour a drink. You're welcome to join me for a minute. Off the clock, I assume." Jack almost declined automatically. He always did. Boundaries mattered. Professional distance mattered. But something about Lucas's tone felt grounded. Not pushy. Not suggestive. Just steady. As if the invitation carried no hidden expectation. "I don't usually," Jack began, then stopped. Lucas waited. No pressure. Jack told himself it would be quick. A few minutes. Polite. Nothing more. "All right," he heard himself say. Lucas stepped aside fully this time. Jack crossed the threshold. The temperature inside was cooler, the lighting softer than the fading sky outside. The air carried a faint scent of cedar and something subtle he couldn't place. Behind him, the door closed quietly. The sound was gentle, final. Jack adjusted his stance, reminding himself this was temporary. Just water, maybe a drink. A brief pause before finishing the night. Nothing complicated, nothing meaningful, just a quick drink. The living room felt warmer than the entryway, not in temperature but in atmosphere. Lucas motioned toward the leather couch, and Jack sat on one end, posture straight, knees slightly apart, hands resting on his thighs as if he were still on the clock. Lucas returned from the kitchen with 2 glasses, nothing elaborate, just a simple pour. He handed one to Jack and took the opposite end of the couch, leaving a respectable space between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lucas broke the quiet. "So how long have you been delivering?" 3 years, Jack replied. "Started part-time, stayed full." You like it? Jack considered the question. I like that it's honest work. You put in the hours, you get paid. No politics. No pretending. Lucas nodded slowly. You seem like someone who values control. Jack gave a faint half-smile. Control keeps things predictable. And predictable feels safe? The question wasn't invasive. It was measured. Curious. Safe enough, Jack said. Lucas didn't interrupt or redirect. He listened in a way that made Jack aware of his own words. Most conversations in his life skimmed surfaces. Sports, traffic, deadlines. This felt different. Lucas asked about long-term plans, about where Jack saw himself in 5 years, about what kind of life he was building beyond overtime pay. Jack answered honestly, surprising himself with how easily the details came out. He spoke about saving for a small house, about financial independence before 35, about not wanting to depend on anyone for stability. Lucas absorbed every sentence, eyes steady, expression thoughtful. You've built a strong foundation, Lucas said quietly. That takes discipline. The acknowledgement landed deeper than Jack expected. He wasn't used to people noticing effort beneath routine. Something shifted inside him, subtle but undeniable. He felt seen, not as a delivery driver, not as a uniform, but as a man with direction. The conversation drifted naturally toward relationships. You ever slow down enough to let someone in? Lucas asked. Jack exhaled lightly. Tried. Didn't work. Why not? I prioritize work. She wanted more time. I don't blame her. Lucas studied him for a moment, then spoke without hesitation. I get that. There was a brief pause before he added calmly. Dating as a gay man isn't exactly simple either. He said it the way someone might mention their hometown. No tension. No performance. Jack felt a flicker of discomfort. Not sharp, not defensive. Just awareness. A recalibration. Oh, Jack replied. Lucas held his gaze. Yeah. There was no expectation in the admission. No challenge. Jack nodded once. That's cool. And he meant it. He reminded himself quietly. I'm straight. This doesn't affect me. Identity wasn't fragile. It didn't shift because someone across from you lived differently. Lucas leaned back into the couch, relaxed. Most people assume things when they find out, he said. They either overcompensate or pull away. I'm not most people, Jack replied. A faint smile curved across Lucas's face again. That same lingering expression from the doorway. The space between them felt smaller now, though neither had made an obvious move. As the conversation continued, Lucas shifted slightly closer. Not enough to invade personal boundaries. Just enough that the distance narrowed from neutral to noticeable. Their shoulders brushed. It was accidental, probably, but Jack felt it instantly. The warmth through fabric, the subtle weight of shared space. His body registered the contact before his thoughts caught up. Why does this feel charged? He didn't move away. He could have. The couch was wide enough. The room was open. Nothing held him in place. Yet he stayed. Lucas laughed at something Jack said about a difficult delivery route, and in the middle of that laugh, his hand came to rest briefly on Jack's arm. The gesture was natural, almost reflexive. Friendly. But it lingered. The touch was soft. Intentional. Steady. Jack's pulse reacted first. A sudden acceleration he couldn't explain. His chest tightened, not in alarm but in heightened awareness. He became acutely conscious of everything. The texture of the couch beneath him, the faint scent of cedar in the air, the quiet hum of the house around them. He didn't fully understand what was happening internally. He only knew that something felt different from anything he had experienced before. This isn't attraction, he told himself. This is proximity. That's all. Lucas withdrew his hand slowly, as if giving Jack space to decide what the moment meant. Neither addressed it. The conversation softened, slowed. Silence eventually settled between them, not awkward, but heavy with possibility. Jack looked at Lucas. Lucas looked back. Eye contact held longer than it should have. Longer than safe. There was no visible challenge in Lucas's expression. No pressure. Just openness. Patience. Jack's breathing felt uneven. He didn't recognize himself in that moment. He didn't recognize the hesitation. Or the pull. Lucas shifted slightly closer again, almost unconsciously, and Jack felt the warmth return along his shoulder. This time, when Lucas's arm moved around him, it wasn't abrupt. It wasn't forceful. It was gradual, an invitation rather than a decision. Jack didn't resist. The embrace was quiet, almost accidental in appearance. Two people sitting close, arms overlapping naturally. But it lasted. Long enough for Jack to feel the steady rhythm of another heartbeat near his own. Long enough for confusion to mix with something else. Something he wasn't ready to name. Neither spoke. The silence said enough. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was layered, uncertain, fragile, alive. Jack remained still, aware of Lucas's arm resting around him. The embrace wasn't possessive. It wasn't urgent. Felt steady, almost protective. He told himself it was harmless. Two adults sharing a quiet moment. Nothing more. He had hugged friends before. Teammates in high school. Co-workers after long shifts. Physical contact didn't automatically mean something deeper. So why did this feel different? Lucas didn't tighten his hold. He didn't rush the moment. His affection moved at a patient pace, giving Jack room to retreat if he wanted. But Jack didn't retreat. He could feel Lucas's breathing slow, controlled. The warmth along his side felt grounding rather than overwhelming. Instead of panic, a strange calm settled over him. Lucas shifted slightly, just enough to see Jack's face more clearly. Their proximity erased the comfortable buffer that had existed earlier. Now there was no pretending the moment was casual. "Still okay?" Lucas asked quietly. Jack nodded, though his throat felt dry. "Yeah." And he meant it. Lucas's hand moved from Jack's shoulder to his jaw, not gripping, not forcing. Just resting there briefly, as if asking permission without words. Jack's mind tried to organize the moment into something logical. "I'm straight. This doesn't change that. It's just curiosity. It's just a moment." But his body wasn't responding with logic. When Lucas leaned in, the movement was slow enough for Jack to stop it. Slow enough for him to stand, step back, reset the boundary. He didn't. The kiss was soft, brief, unexpected, not demanding, not aggressive. Felt less like a claim and more like a question. For a split second, Jack froze. Not from fear, but from the shock of unfamiliar sensation. His heart pounded against his ribs. His thoughts scattered. Lucas pulled back slightly, giving space. Jack inhaled sharply. He wasn't angry. He wasn't offended. He was shaken. His breath came unevenly as he tried to steady himself. The room felt different now, closer, heavier. He placed his hands on his knees, grounding himself in something solid. "What was that?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to Lucas. Lucas's expression didn't shift into apology or pride. It remained open, honest. "It was just a kiss," he said gently. Jack ran a hand through his hair, staring at the floor for a moment. "Am I questioning who I am?" The thought surfaced before he could stop it. Was I just curious? Or had he ignored something about himself for years because it was easier to live inside certainty? He had always believed identity was fixed, clear, defined early and carried forward without revision. But this didn't feel like a threat to his masculinity. It didn't feel like betrayal of his past. Felt like confusion. And confusion unsettled him more than rejection ever could. Lucas shifted closer again, but slower this time. "You don't have to label anything tonight," he said softly. The sentence landed with unexpected relief. No label, no decision, no public declaration, just a moment. Jack looked up at him, searching for pressure or expectation. He found neither. Instead, he saw patience. They didn't rush again. There was no escalation, just closeness. Lucas's hand resting over Jack's. Jack allowing it. Breathing steadying gradually. They sat like that for several minutes, the intensity softening into something quieter. The world outside the windows felt distant. Time slowed, Jack felt suspended between two versions of himself, the man who walked in confident and certain, and the man sitting there now, aware of new possibilities he had never considered. Eventually, reality returned in small reminders. The clock on the wall, the faint vibration of his phone signaling unfinished routes. He stood slowly. "I should go," he said. Lucas nodded. No resistance. "Okay." They walked to the door together. The space between them felt different now, not awkward but aware. At the threshold, Jack hesitated. He didn't regret the moment. That surprised him most. He opened the door, stepping back into the cooler night air. The world outside looked exactly the same as it had before. But he didn't feel exactly the same. He took a few steps toward his truck, then paused. Something compelled him to turn around. Lucas stood in the doorway, framed by warm light, watching quietly. Not smiling broadly, not calling him back, just watching. Jack held his gaze for one lingering second. Then he looked away, climbed into his truck, and shut the door, heart still unsteady, mind no longer certain of anything at all. The next morning, everything looked the same. Same warehouse, same conveyor belts, same stack of cardboard waiting to be scanned and sorted. But Jack didn't feel the same. He missed a barcode on his first load, something he hadn't done in years. His supervisor gave him a look of mild surprise, not criticism, just confusion. Jack corrected it quickly, brushing it off as fatigue. Fatigue would have been easier to explain. Throughout the day, his focus drifted in ways that unsettled him. He replayed the moment on the couch. The silence, the warmth, the kiss. Not obsessively, but persistently. At every stoplight, his mind circled back. He told himself it was just shock, just novelty. Anyone would feel thrown off after something unexpected. But he had dealt with unexpected before. Traffic accidents, sudden schedule changes, arguments. This was different. When he checked his delivery route for the week, his stomach tightened at the sight of Lucas's neighborhood. He scanned the list twice, confirming addresses. The house wasn't there. Relief came too quickly. Why am I relieved? He wondered. From him, or from myself? He started double-checking schedules before every shift, almost anxiously. If a route took him near that street, he felt his pulse rise. If it didn't, he felt disappointed in a way he refused to examine. That contradiction bothered him most. He hadn't betrayed anyone. He was single. No promises broken. No lines crossed against his will. So why did guilt hover over him? Guilt implied wrongdoing. But what exactly had he done? He lay awake later than usual that week, phone glowing against the dark ceiling of his bedroom. His search history began cautiously. Can straight men question attraction? Is curiosity normal? Late identity confusion. Each question felt heavier than the last. He found articles discussing sexual fluidity. Studies suggesting attraction isn't always rigid. Stories of men who discovered new dimensions of themselves in their 20s, 30s, even 50s. He watched videos of people describing late self-discovery. Not dramatic transformations, but quiet realizations. Men who had lived comfortably in one identity until a single experience forced them to pause and reconsider. Some described fear. Others described relief. Many described both. Jack didn't fully see himself in their stories, but he didn't feel completely separate either. One phrase stayed with him. Identity can evolve without invalidating your past. He read it twice. He had built his life on certainty. Certainty meant strength. It meant decisiveness. It meant never second-guessing your direction. But now certainty felt unstable. Not shattered, just loosened. At work, he noticed how rigidly he had always defined things. Straight or not, strong or weak, focused or distracted. There had never been room for gray areas in his worldview. Now gray areas surrounded him. He struggled with pride more than anything else. Pride in knowing who he was. Pride in not wavering. Pride in simplicity. If identity could shift, even slightly, what did that say about the foundation he had trusted? Was questioning weakness? Or was it awareness? He didn't have answers. He only knew that dismissing the experience as meaningless felt dishonest. But labeling it felt premature. Self-awareness, he realized slowly, wasn't a finish line. It wasn't something you achieved once and never revisited. It was ongoing, personal, sometimes uncomfortable. He set his phone down one night and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't ready to change how he identified. He wasn't ready to redefine himself publicly or privately. But he could no longer pretend nothing had happened internally. For the first time in his adult life, Jack wasn't entirely certain of himself. And that uncertainty followed him into sleep like a quiet, persistent echo he couldn't silence. The email arrived just before noon. Jack had just returned from a morning route when his supervisor asked him to step into the office. The tone was neutral, but formal enough to tighten something in his chest. Inside, the door closed gently. "There's been a complaint," his supervisor said, sliding a printed report across the desk. "We're required to review it." Jack frowned. In 3 years, he had never received one. He skimmed the document. The words blurred at first, then sharpened painfully into focus. Customer states driver behaved inappropriately. Driver remained on property longer than necessary. Driver created an uncomfortable environment. Jack's heartbeat quickened. "This isn't right," he said immediately. "I don't do that." His supervisor nodded, not accusing. "We're not making assumptions, but it's a signature-required address. Cameras confirm you were there longer than average." Jack's mind raced. Longer than average. Water. Conversation. The couch. "Who filed it?" he asked quietly. His supervisor hesitated for half a second before answering. "Lucas Bennett." The name hit harder than the accusation. For a moment, Jack thought he had misheard. "That's not possible," he said almost reflexively. But it was. Shock came first. Then confusion. Then something sharper. Betrayal. He replayed the evening in his mind. The invitation. The patience. The kiss. The words. "You don't have to label anything tonight." There had been no hostility when he left. No argument. No sign of discomfort. So why this? Company policy requires temporary suspension during investigation. His supervisor continued carefully. "It's procedural. Suspension." The word echoed. Jack's job wasn't just a paycheck. It was identity, structure, proof of reliability. He signed the acknowledgement form with steady hands, though internally he felt anything but steady. Walking out of the warehouse felt surreal. Coworkers avoided direct eye contact, sensing tension without knowing details. In his truck, parked but not running, he sat motionless. He wasn't angry yet. He was stunned. The complaint wasn't violent. It didn't accuse him of assault. It accused him of crossing professional boundaries. Lingering. Making someone uncomfortable. In a corporate environment, that was enough. Reputational damage didn't require criminal behavior. It required doubt. Jack stared at his phone for several minutes before finally typing Lucas's name into his contacts. He hesitated. Then he drove. When Lucas opened the door this time, the warmth from before was absent. Not replaced with hostility, just guardedness. "We need to talk," Jack said evenly. Lucas's expression shifted when he saw the seriousness in Jack's eyes. He stepped aside without argument. Inside, the house felt different. Same furniture, same lighting, but the atmosphere carried tension. "You filed a complaint," Jack said. It wasn't a question. Lucas didn't deny it. "Yes." The admission felt colder than any lie would have. "Why?" Silence stretched between them. Lucas exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand along the back of his neck. "I thought you'd disappear," he said finally. Jack blinked. "What?" "You left that night and I didn't hear from you. No message. No call. Nothing." "It's been a few days," Jack replied, disbelief edging into his voice. "I've been working." Lucas looked away, jaw tightening. "You looked back before you left. I thought that meant something." "It did," Jack said. "It meant I was confused." The word hung there. Lucas's composure faltered slightly. "I've been through this before." Jack waited. "My last relationship ended badly. Lucas continued. He said I was manipulative, that I tried to control situations when I felt insecure. He told people that publicly. Friends, colleagues. I lost more than the relationship. Jack absorbed this quietly. I don't handle abandonment well, Lucas admitted. When I sense someone pulling away, I react. I protect myself. By accusing me? Jack asked, voice firm but controlled. Lucas didn't meet his eyes. By making sure I'm not the one left vulnerable. The pieces aligned. Lucas hadn't filed the complaint out of malice. He had filed it out of fear. When Jack didn't immediately return, didn't define the connection, didn't validate the moment, Lucas's old wounds resurfaced. Instead of communicating, he regained control the only way he knew how, by shifting power. It wasn't physical revenge. It was social, professional, strategic. The complaint placed Jack on unstable ground. It protected Lucas from feeling rejected first. You could cost me my job, Jack said quietly. Lucas swallowed. The weight of that reality seemed to land in real time. I didn't think they'd suspend you. But you knew it would create a record. Lucas didn't answer. The silence said enough. Jack felt anger rising now, not explosive but steady, controlled. He had walked into Lucas's house uncertain about himself. Now he stood there certain of one thing. Trust had been broken. Not by confusion. By choice. And that choice had consequences far beyond a single evening on a couch. Suspension felt heavier than termination would have. Termination would have been final, clear, decisive. Suspension was different. It left Jack suspended in uncertainty, his record marked with an unresolved allegation. He was instructed not to report for routes until Human Resources completed the review. Standard procedure, they said. Standard didn't make it easier. By the second day, word had spread through the warehouse. No one approached him directly, but he saw the glances. Conversations that quieted when he entered the break room to clear out his locker. A few co-workers offered polite nods, cautious and distant, reliable, disciplined, steady. That had been his reputation. Now there was a question mark beside his name. Jack had built his identity around being dependable. He never cut corners, never blurred professional lines, never stayed longer than required at a stop. Yet camera footage confirmed he had lingered. He couldn't deny that part, but context mattered. At night, the uncertainty pressed in harder. HR had asked detailed questions during a phone interview. How long he was inside the residence, whether the customer initiated conversation, whether there had been any physical contact. He answered honestly. Yes, he stepped inside. Yes, the customer offered water. Yes, they talked. Yes, there was contact. He could hear the pause on the other end of the line when he admitted that. Was it consensual? The HR representative asked carefully. Yes. The word felt strange but solid. When the call ended, Jack sat alone in his apartment, staring at the wall where he kept his framed delivery commendation from the previous year. Employee Reliability Award. Perfect attendance. His self-image, clean, controlled, disciplined, began to fracture. Not because he had made a mistake, but because someone else's fear had rewritten the story. For 2 days, he debated confronting Lucas again. Part of him wanted to let the investigation unfold, to trust process, to avoid emotional entanglement. But process moved slowly. Reputation eroded quickly. On the third evening, he got in his truck and drove. He wasn't fueled by rage. Anger had cooled into something steadier, determination. When Lucas opened the door this time, surprise flickered across his face. I thought we said everything, Lucas began. No, Jack replied calmly. We didn't. Lucas stepped aside. The house felt quiet, almost heavy with unspoken tension. Jack remained standing near the entryway, choosing distance deliberately. HR interviewed me, Jack said. Do you understand what this could do? Lucas crossed his arms, not defensive, but bracing. I told you, I didn't mean for it to escalate. That's not the same as not meaning harm. Lucas's jaw tightened. I didn't accuse you of assault. You accused me of misconduct, Jack countered. In my job, that's enough. Silence filled the space between them. For a moment, Lucas held onto composure. Then it cracked, not dramatically but subtly. "I panicked," he admitted. Jack waited. "I thought you'd go back to your life and pretend none of it happened," Lucas continued. "Like it was just a curiosity you could ignore." Jack exhaled slowly. "I was confused. That's not pretending. You didn't call. It's been days. It felt longer." There it was, the core of it. Lucas walked toward the window, staring out into the dark street. "When I sense someone pulling away, I react before they can leave. By taking control," Jack said. Lucas nodded once, reluctantly. "I needed to feel like I wasn't the one being dismissed." "So you filed first," Jack replied quietly. "So you wouldn't be the one rejected." The words landed hard. Lucas didn't argue. "I didn't think they'd suspend you," he said again, softer this time. "But you knew it would shift the narrative." Lucas closed his eyes briefly. Yes, revenge hadn't looked dramatic. It hadn't been loud or explosive. It had been strategic, born not from hatred but insecurity. Jack studied him carefully. The strong presence from the first night now seemed layered with something more fragile. "You hurt me," Jack said evenly. "Not because of what happened on that couch, but because you chose power over honesty." Lucas didn't respond immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its usual calm edge. "I didn't want to be invisible again." Jack understood the fear, but understanding didn't erase consequence. Outside, a car passed slowly, headlights sweeping across the room before fading. Reputation, Jack realized, could be dismantled quietly, just as quietly as it had once been built. And now both of them stood in the shadow of that truth. Jack stood in Lucas's living room, arms loosely at his sides, eyes level with the man who had turned a quiet evening into days of anxiety and self-doubt. He wasn't angry, not in the raw, explosive way that might have felt satisfying. He was calm, focused, determined. "Lucas," he began, voice steady, "I need you to withdraw the complaint, completely, and I need full transparency. No half-truths, no excuses. I need the truth about what this was." Lucas's expression stiffened at first. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as if weighing whether honesty would make things worse. Finally, he exhaled slowly and nodded. "All right," he said. "You deserve that much." He led Jack to the couch. This time, both men remained seated without a touch, without an embrace. Space felt necessary. Jack's posture communicated resolve, firm, unmoving, unyielding. Lucas began quietly, almost hesitantly. I have attachment trauma. I've known it for years, but I rarely admit it. When I sense someone might pull away, I react before thinking. And I fear being erased, completely forgotten, dismissed." Jack listened carefully. He could feel the weight of these words, the vulnerability beneath the defensiveness. The confession wasn't meant to absolve him of responsibility. It was an explanation, a window into behavior that had been harmful. "I didn't communicate," Lucas continued, eyes fixed on his hands. "I filed the complaint not because of what happened with you, but because I was afraid. Afraid you would leave without acknowledging what this meant to you. Afraid I'd be invisible again. I wanted control, any control I could get, to protect myself." Jack allowed the pause to stretch. Understanding didn't erase the consequences, but he recognized a fundamental truth. This was not malicious. It was fear. It was trauma. And trauma, left unchecked, can manifest in ways that hurt others. "You see," Jack said softly, "emotional responsibility isn't just about your feelings. It's about how your actions affect someone else. Consent and communication matter even in emotional spaces. Filing a complaint without talking to me first, that crossed a line." Lucas nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I see that now." Jack leaned forward slightly. Revenge, when it's rooted in insecurity, often disguises itself as protection. But it doesn't protect anyone. It only hurts both people involved. You acted defensively, not maliciously, but the result was the same. Lucas's shoulders slumped. I see that. I should have addressed it differently. I should have talked to you before letting fear dictate my actions. Therapy can help, Jack added, choosing words carefully. It doesn't erase fear, but it teaches regulation, awareness, how to respond instead of react, how to communicate before letting panic control you. Lucas nodded, almost imperceptibly. I've considered it, but I never followed through. This is your chance, Jack said. Not just for me, for yourself, for the next time fear shows up. Another pause. Then slowly Lucas reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen. I'll withdraw it. I'll make it clear to HR that this was a misunderstanding, and that no harm was intended. Complete transparency. No omissions. Jack watched carefully. Every small gesture carried weight. Trust wasn't rebuilt in words alone. Actions mattered. When the confirmation email came later that afternoon, Jack felt a wave of relief. HR cleared him. His record was restored. His reputation at work was intact. But something else lingered. Trust, personal, emotional, had been fractured. The quiet ease of the first night, the warmth of their conversation on the couch, even the surprising closeness, those were now shaded by the memory of betrayal, of fear mismanaged. Jack understood it wasn't malice. Lucas hadn't intended to harm him, and yet the effect had been real. His emotional boundary had been crossed, not violently, not aggressively, but decisively. That mattered. They sat together for a moment longer, neither rushing to fill the silence. The room felt heavier, but clearer. Accountability had been named. Transparency achieved. Consequences addressed. You can't undo the damage, Jack said finally, voice calm but firm. But you can learn from it, and that matters. Lucas nodded, eyes fixed on the table between them. I will. I promise I'll do better. Not just for you, but for myself. For the next time this happens. Jack gave a small, slow nod. Good. That's all I can ask. They stood. No hugs this time. No lingering touch. Only respect and acknowledgement of the space that had been violated, and the lessons earned. As Jack left, he felt a quiet sense of closure. But he also carried the reminder that trust isn't automatic. It is fragile, and rebuilding it requires patience, honesty, and accountability, qualities Lucas had just begun to embrace. Outside, the city hummed with life. Jack breathed in the cool evening air. Relief settled over him, but so did vigilance. He knew the road ahead wasn't erased by a single confession. Trust would take time. But the first step, the acknowledgement of truth and the choice to act responsibly, had been taken. For Jack, that was enough for now. The days after Lucas withdrew the complaint were quieter than Jack expected. Work returned to normal. Colleagues no longer whispered. HR closed the case. Yet Jack felt a subtle weight pressing against him. Not from anger, but from reflection. He thought about the first night, the warmth, the closeness, the unexpected kiss, the laughter, and then the betrayal, the complaint, the suspension, the tension. Most people would assume revenge meant confrontation, retaliation, public embarrassment, a sharp word or a calculated strike. Jack considered all of that and set it aside. Instead, he chose something quieter, something more lasting. He forgave, not in a sentimental way, not out of weakness, but with clarity. He acknowledged Lucas's fear, his trauma, and the human impulse behind his mistake. Forgiveness didn't erase what happened. It didn't restore trust fully, but it restored Jack's power over his own life. And with that forgiveness came boundaries. He refused to let confusion define him. He refused to let shame dictate his thoughts. He refused manipulation, whether subtle or overt. He continued delivering, talking to co-workers, living his life. Yet internally, he began a deeper exploration of himself. Therapy became a tool, not a last resort. A safe space to examine feelings that had surprised him. Feelings that had nothing to do with weakness. He questioned his orientation without panic. He revisited assumptions about identity, attraction, and desire. Not for anyone else. Not to justify anything. But for himself. He realized that what he had felt wasn't a flaw or a failure. It wasn't confusion in a negative sense. It was human complexity, a reminder that feelings are layered, sometimes contradictory, and not always simple to categorize. Jack began to feel lighter. The anxiety that had gripped him after the complaint gradually ebbed. He could acknowledge the unexpected pull toward Lucas without it undermining his sense of self. He could admit the intensity of the moment without needing a label. And then came the quietest, sharpest part of his revenge. Lucas expected anger, confrontation, a public assertion of wrongdoing, a storm of emotion to validate his fear that he had hurt Jack. Instead, Lucas received calm detachment. Jack approached Lucas when they crossed paths outside, briefly, politely. No recrimination, no lingering glances, no unspoken tension to be manipulated. Lucas looked at him, eyes searching for something. Regret, fury, humiliation. He found none. Jack smiled lightly. Not warmth, not invitation. Just acknowledgement, respect, neutrality. For Lucas, the lack of reaction carried more weight than any argument could. His defensive armor had anticipated fire, and instead found stillness. The realization that Jack had moved beyond the need for revenge, beyond the pain he might have expected him to feel, hurt more than confrontation ever could. Jack's quiet confidence became his statement. His choice to forgive but not return emotionally, to set boundaries, to take ownership of his growth. This was his real victory. In a subtle, profound way, he had reclaimed himself. He no longer measured himself against fear or expectation. He no longer allowed shame or confusion to dictate action. He had taken the most deliberate revenge possible, control over his own mind, his own choices, and his own identity. And as he walked away that evening, past the streets lit by street lamps, past the familiar routes of his delivery truck, he felt something he hadn't in weeks: peace. Not complete closure, not finality, but enough certainty in himself to know that whatever came next, he would meet it from a place of calm strength, human complexity, and unwavering personal boundaries. That was revenge done right. Months had passed since the tension, the complaint, and the emotional turbulence. Life had resumed its rhythm for Jack, but something within him had changed. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but irrevocably. He still worked long hours, navigating the city's streets with precision, delivering packages on time, earning nods of approval from supervisors and coworkers alike. Yet the work now felt different, less like a rigid routine, more like a backdrop against which he could reflect, breathe, and think. Jack had become more self-aware. The experience with Lucas had opened doors inside himself that he hadn't realized existed. He approached his feelings with curiosity instead of judgment. Moments of unexpected connection no longer triggered guilt or panic. Instead, he noticed, accepted, and observed. He no longer defined himself with rigid labels. Straight, masculine, controlled, predictable. Those words still applied in part, but they no longer suffocated him. He understood now that attraction exists on a spectrum, that emotional complexity doesn't require a name. The pull he had felt toward Lucas, the confusion it caused, had been a natural part of being human, not a threat to his identity. He didn't broadcast these insights. He didn't explain them to anyone. Public identity, he realized, could remain simple, reliable, and stable. Internal identity, however, could be fluid, complex, and evolving. He had learned to sit with that tension without fear. Lucas, meanwhile, had taken the lessons in another direction. Therapy had become a consistent part of his life. He explored the roots of his attachment trauma, learning to recognize fear before it dictated actions. He learned accountability, and slowly, the awareness of how his past had caused unnecessary sabotage began to crystallize. He regretted how fear had driven the complaint, how he had sought control instead of communication, and how that reaction had almost destroyed a professional record and a fragile bond of trust. One evening, by chance or perhaps by intention, they met again outside a coffee shop in a neutral part of the city. No scheduled delivery, no lingering invitation. Just two men standing on the sidewalk, the hum of cars and city life around them. The moment was quiet. Neither rushed to fill it with words. Neither reached across the gap with expectation. There was no hostility, no accusation, no romance. Lucas spoke first, his voice steady, but softer than before. I shouldn't have tried to control what scared me. Jack listened, letting the words land. He nodded slowly. The acknowledgement felt earned. And I shouldn't have run from what confused me, he replied. The honesty in that exchange carried a weight far deeper than any argument or confrontation ever could. They both recognized their past mistakes, owned them without justification, and accepted that growth often comes through discomfort. The conversation was brief. They didn't linger over hypotheticals or apologies. No gestures, no lingering touches. Just words, honest and clear, and the shared understanding that past actions had shaped them but would not define them. As they parted, Jack felt a sense of completion. Not closure in the neat storybook sense. Not finality, but a quiet assurance. He was no longer bound by fear, confusion, or shame. His identity had been rewritten, not in haste, not in surrender, but in deliberate reflection, awareness, and acceptance of human complexity. Lucas walked away with a lighter step too, mindful now of how fear had driven his actions, yet confident he could respond differently in the future. Both men carried lessons that would resonate in their own lives, quietly, persistently. Jack returned to his delivery route, to the familiar streets and packages waiting in the truck. But he moved differently. Not faster, not mechanically, but with awareness, calm, and a measured confidence born from experience. He understood that identity, desire, and human connection are rarely simple. Labels are tools, not prisons. Boundaries are necessary, but flexibility is essential. The emotional spectrum is wide, and it's human to navigate it imperfectly. For Jack, this was evolution. Not dramatic, not flashy, but profound. He no longer feared the unknown aspects of himself. He didn't have to explain them. He didn't have to deny them. He just understood. And in that understanding, he found peace. The city moved around him, fast and indifferent. But he had discovered something within. A sense of control that didn't require rigidity, a trust in himself that didn't demand certainty, and an acceptance of complexity that allowed him to live fully in the present. Identity rewritten, boundaries respected, growth achieved, and for the first time in a long while he felt unshakably free. The night was cool, the streets glimmering under scattered streetlights. Jack stepped out of his delivery van, package in hand, and approached a mid-sized suburban home. The routine was familiar. Check the label, knock once, wait. The door opened almost immediately, and a man greeted him with a polite, neutral smile. A stranger, different neighborhood, different package, different moment. Jack returned the smile. This time it wasn't hesitant. It wasn't uncertain. There was no tension behind it, no invisible weight pressing against his chest. No fear, no confusion, no shame. He felt grounded, present, fully himself. The man said, "Evening. Delivery for you." Jack handed over the package, signed the confirmation, and nodded. "Thank you." That brief interaction, so ordinary on the surface, felt profound to him internally. He understood the subtle shift. He could engage fully without losing himself. He could offer politeness without vulnerability being mistaken for weakness. He could navigate closeness without confusion or hesitation. He turned, walking back toward the van. The steps were light, steady. His mind was clear. Thoughts of the past, the kiss, the complaint, the suspension were no longer burdens. They were lessons quietly shaping his understanding of himself. Sliding into the driver's seat, Jack started the engine. The hum of the motor felt like a soft exhale. The city lights stretched ahead, reflective on wet streets from a brief earlier drizzle. Neon signs flickered in rhythm with the distant traffic. The world moved around him, fast, unpredictable, alive. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt equally alive, equally steady, equally in control. He realized something essential. Identity is a journey, not a fixed point, not a rigid label. A path shaped by reflection, honesty, and experience. Revenge born from fear destroys connection. It isolates, distorts, and inflicts harm, even when intentions are misunderstood. Jack had seen it firsthand. He had felt its weight. He had walked away with awareness and calm detachment, the true power of restraint. Growth rooted in honesty builds strength. It demands reflection, accountability, and courage, the kind that doesn't require dramatic confrontation, but the quiet discipline to face oneself and others without defensiveness. Love, real love, requires consent, clarity, and courage, not impulsive reactions, not fear-driven attempts to control. Jack understood that now in a way he hadn't before. As he drove through the city, the rhythm of his life resumed. Packages to deliver, streets to navigate, routines to complete. Yet nothing felt mechanical anymore. He carried a deeper knowledge of himself, a steadiness that no complaint, no betrayal, no fear could unsettle. And in that, he smiled, not at someone else, but at the life he had earned through reflection, honesty, and growth. The night stretched ahead, infinite and unhurried, illuminated by city lights and his newfound clarity. Identity was a journey. Revenge rooted in fear destroys connection. Growth rooted in honesty builds strength. Love requires consent, clarity, and courage.